My older brother stood at our father's 75th birthday party, raised his glass, looked straight at me, and said, "Dad always knew you'd be the family failure." Everybody laughed. My cousins laughed. My neighbors laughed. My father said nothing. And sitting there in a cheap blue folding chair beside the trash bags, I started wondering if maybe they really had forgotten who I was. What none of them knew was that for more than 20 years, I'd been carrying a name I never spoke out loud. A name that, before the night was over, would make a retired Navy SEAL drop his drink and stand at attention in front of my entire family. By sunrise, the same brother who spent decades tearing me down couldn't stop apologizing. But by then, the truth had already exposed what my family had spent years refusing to see. I used to think being ignored was better than being attacked. That night taught me the truth. When your own family laughs at the version of you they invented, silence stops being peace. It becomes permission, and I had given them permission for far too long. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from today. And have you ever sat in a room full of family and realized you were completely invisible? Now let me take you back to the afternoon it all began. I almost turned around twice before I reached my father's ranch. The first time was outside Kilgore, when the road opened into a stretch of pine trees and empty pasture land. The second time was 20 miles later, when my phone lost signal and the silence inside my truck became louder than the radio. For a moment, I actually rested my hand on the steering wheel and thought about heading home. Nobody would have been surprised. I hadn't been to a family gathering in years, not because I hated my family. Sometimes people assume that's why someone stays away. The truth is usually simpler. Disappointment gets exhausting. At some point, peace becomes easier. Still, my father was turning 75. That number carried weight. I told myself that was why I was making the drive, nothing more. On the passenger seat sat a wooden box. Inside was a pocket watch I'd spent months restoring. It had belonged to my grandfather. Hidden beneath the velvet lining was something else. A challenge coin. Most people would have thought it was just an old military keepsake. It wasn't. I hadn't decided whether I would give it to my father. Part of me still wanted his approval. At 52 years old, that felt embarrassing to admit. But some wounds never completely age out of you. The ranch looked exactly the same when I arrived. Pickup trucks lined the gravel driveway. Country music drifted through outdoor speakers. Children chased footballs across the grass. Smoke rolled from 3 barbecue pits near the barn. People laughed. People hugged. People belonged. I parked near the fence and climbed out, carrying the watch box. Nobody noticed. Not immediately. My brother Blaine's truck sat near the front entrance like it owned the place. That felt about right. Blaine had always known how to occupy a room before entering it. I grabbed a few folding tables from my truck and started carrying them toward the yard. A cousin walked past me. "Hey, can you set those near the drinks?" He didn't recognize me until I answered. "Oh, Colton." Then he kept walking. I smiled to myself. Some things never changed. A few minutes later, one of my nephews pointed toward me. "Who's that?" His father glanced over. "Your Uncle Colton." The boy squinted. I thought he was one of Dad's work friends. Nobody corrected him. Nobody seemed bothered. I carried another table toward the oak trees. The afternoon moved on. People greeted Blaine constantly. Handshakes, backslaps, stories, photos. I unloaded coolers, moved chairs, hung string lights. Not a single person thanked me. By itself, that wasn't a big deal. When it happens for 20 years, it becomes one. Later, I walked toward the main seating area. Name cards sat on tables. Every seat had been assigned. Every one except mine. I looked around. Near the drink coolers sat an old blue folding chair. One leg was slightly bent. It rested beside 2 trash bags waiting for pickup. Far from my father, far from the family table. I already knew. Before anyone said a word, I knew. Then Blaine appeared behind me. He chuckled. "Well, look at that." I turned. He raised an eyebrow toward the chair. "Looks like they saved your throne." A few relatives laughed, not cruelly, which somehow made it worse. Nobody said, "That's not right." Nobody offered their seat. I pulled out the chair and sat down. "Comfortable enough," I said. Blaine grinned and walked away. The conversation around me continued as if nothing had happened. Because to them, Nothing had. As the afternoon rolled toward evening, the same old story played out. People talked about Blaine's business, Blaine's grandchildren, Blaine's latest property deal. Someone asked if I'd ever remarried. Before I could answer, another relative said, Colton always liked doing his own thing. Everybody nodded. That was the family version of my life. Doing my own thing. Not service. Not sacrifice. Not loss. Just disappearing. Nobody asked why. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Around 5 o'clock, a black SUV rolled into the driveway. The vehicle caught my attention because it didn't belong to anyone in the family. A tall older man stepped out. Military posture, white hair, sharp eyes. He moved differently from everyone else. My father hurried over to greet him. People gathered around immediately. Apparently his name was Boone Garrison, a retired Navy SEAL. When introductions began, I stayed where I was. Eventually, Boone's gaze reached me. My father gestured in my direction. And that's my youngest son, Colton. For a brief second, Boone froze. Not long, just enough. His expression shifted. Recognition, then confusion, then something else. Something careful. He gave a small nod. Nothing more. But I noticed, and somehow, I knew he had too. The sun lowered behind the trees. Lights flickered on across the yard. Dinner wrapped up. People gathered around the main table. Blaine stood and picked up a glass. I'll do the birthday toast. Everyone cheered. My father smiled proudly. I remained in the blue chair, watching, waiting, still hoping for one small acknowledgement, one look, one word. Instead, my father focused on the crowd gathered around Blaine. The feeling wasn't hatred. That would have been easier. No, it was something quieter. I was simply forgotten. As Blaine lifted his glass and smiled toward the crowd, I had a feeling the worst part of the evening hadn't happened yet. Blaine tapped a spoon against his glass, and the yard settled the way it always did when he wanted attention. People turned toward him before he even spoke. That was one of his gifts. He never had to ask for the center of the room. Folks just handed it to him, same as they handed him Dad's truck keys when he was 16, the office keys when he was 30, and the family story somewhere in between. I stayed in the old blue folding chair with the wooden box resting across my knees. Meredith Klein, one of Mom's church friends, stepped near the projector screen they had set up beside the patio. She was wearing a cream cardigan, even though the evening still had some heat in it. Before Blaine gives the toast, she said, smiling toward Dad, we have a little tribute video for Vernon. Everybody clapped. The screen lit up. There was Dad in his 20s, standing beside his first tractor. Dad and Blaine, in front of Dossland and equipment. Dad shaking hands with the mayor. Dad holding Blaine's firstborn grandson. Dad at ribbon cuttings, church picnics, fishing trips, county fundraisers. Blaine appeared so often he might as well have been the second guest of honor. I showed up once, maybe. A childhood picture flashed by, and I saw half my shoulder at the edge of the frame. I was wearing a Little League cap and holding a tackle box. The image moved on before anyone could notice. No one said my name. Not Meredith, not Dad, not Blaine. That kind of thing sounds small until you have lived through enough of it. Then it stops feeling like an accident. It starts feeling like a decision everyone made without a meeting. I remembered coming home once in uniform, years earlier. I had driven all night because I wanted to surprise Dad for Thanksgiving. By the time I got there, Blaine was already telling a story about a dealership expansion, and nobody asked why I looked like I had not slept in 3 days. Mom had kissed my cheek and said, "You're quiet tonight, honey." That was all. The video ended with a picture of Dad and Blaine standing beneath the Dossland and equipment sign. The yard applauded. Dad smiled the way I had spent most of my life trying to earn. Blaine stepped forward with his bourbon glass. "Thank y'all," he said, easy as Sunday morning. Dad always taught us that a man earns his place. No shortcuts, no whining, no excuses. People nodded. That line was scripture in our family. He talked about Dad's grit, his work ethic, how he built something out of red dirt and stubbornness. He thanked business partners. He thanked cousins. He thanked the church folks who brought casseroles when Mom was sick. He thanked his own children for carrying the Doss name forward. He did not thank me. I told myself I had not expected him to. That was almost true. Boone Garrison stood near the bar with a paper plate untouched in one hand. He was not laughing much. He watched Blaine, then Dad, then me. Not in a nosy way. More like a man counting exits in a room that did not know it had become dangerous. Blaine's voice warmed as he moved into family humor. "Now, every family has different kinds of sons," he said. "You've got the one who keeps the business running, keeps the name respected, keeps Dad from worrying too much." A few people clapped and laughed. Then he turned toward me. "And then you've got the one who teaches everybody patience." The laughter came early. That was how trained they were. I kept my face calm. Blaine lifted his glass a little higher. "Dad always knew you'd be the family failure, Colton." The yard broke open with laughter. Some of it was loud, some of it was nervous. Some of it came from people who probably did not even hear the whole sentence, but knew when the family was expected to laugh. I did not look at Blaine. I looked at Dad. That was the mistake. His mouth moved slightly, like he had a correction ready. Maybe even a soft one, something like, "Now, Blaine," or "That's enough." But he looked down into his glass instead. The words never came. That silence did more damage than the joke. Humiliation from strangers can bruise your pride. Humiliation from family goes backward. It finds every birthday where you waited to be noticed, every dinner where your name came after everyone else's, every moment you told yourself not to make trouble. Have you ever been embarrassed by family in a room where you thought at least one person would protect you? If you have, then you know why I stayed still. It was not because I had nothing to say. It was because I had too many things to say, and none of them belonged at my father's birthday party. My hands tightened around the wooden box. For a few seconds, I thought about standing up, walking past the smokers, getting into my truck, and driving until the ranch lights disappeared behind me. If I left, Blaine would say I proved his point. If I stayed, he would think he had permission. That was the trap. So I stayed. Not for Blaine, not for the people laughing. I stayed because some foolish, tired part of me still hoped Dad might look up and realize what had just happened. Across the yard, Boone's eyes had narrowed. He saw my hands on the box. He saw my shoulders stay level. He saw the breath I took before I let the anger pass through without giving it a place to land. Military men notice things like that. Blaine moved on like he had only made a harmless joke. "All right," he said, grinning. "Let's get Dad his gifts before the old man falls asleep on us." People laughed again, softer this time. I looked down at the box on my lap. The pocket watch inside suddenly felt heavier than wood and brass had any right to feel. I told myself I could survive one more insult, but then Blaine reached for the only gift I had brought for my father. Blaine did not ask permission before taking the box. He just reached down, lifted it off my knees, and carried it toward Dad like he was doing everyone a favor. I stood because staying seated would have made it look like I had given up ownership of the one thing I had brought with care. Mom noticed me move. "Colton brought something too," she said. "Not your brother, not your son, something too." I kept my voice even. "It's for Dad." Blaine set the box in front of him with a little flourish. "Let's see what the mystery man found in his garage." A few people chuckled. Dad opened the lid. For a second, his face softened. The pocket watch sat inside, polished but not shiny, the old brass clean just enough to show its age. I had tracked down a replacement spring from a repair shop in Oklahoma, watched videos late at night, and ruined 2 tiny screws before getting it right. Dad touched the watch with one finger. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting beside him on the porch, while he showed me how to wind it. "Don't force time," he had said back then. "You'll break what's inside." I had not thought about that sentence in years. Maybe that was what I wanted from the gift. Not applause, not even gratitude. Just one moment where Dad remembered that we had once been close without Blaine standing between us. Before Dad could open the note tucked beneath it, Blaine picked up the watch. "Well, I'll be," he said. Colton finally brought something useful to the table. That got another round of laughter. Dad gave a small smile, more out of habit than cruelty, but habits can cut too. Blaine turned the watch over. "Probably worth more if it still runs." "It does," I said. He looked surprised that I answered. Then his fingers brushed the velvet lining. The challenge coin slipped free and landed against the wood with a dull click. The sound was small. To me, It felt like a door unlocking. Blaine picked it up. It was heavy, darkened around the edges, worn smooth where my thumb had rubbed it during bad nights. On one side was a faded emblem. On the other, one word had survived better than the rest: ghost line. Blaine squinted. "What's this supposed to be?" Nobody answered. He flipped it between his fingers like a poker chip. "Another army souvenir?" I stepped closer. "Put it back." The yard quieted just a little. Not enough for people to understand why. Enough for Boone Garrison to turn his head. Blaine smiled like he had found a new game. "Relax, brother. Don't get touchy. You always act like everybody's attacking you." That line was familiar. People who hurt you love calling your reaction the real problem. "It came from Afghanistan," I said. I gave them only that much. Most of the family lost interest right away. Afghanistan was too far away. Too old. Too uncomfortable. Easier to go back to cake plates and sweet tea. But Boone did not move. His eyes settled on the coin, then on me. Something changed in his face. He came a few steps closer, slow and careful. "Where did you get that?" he asked. The question was quiet, but it carried weight. I looked at him, then at the coin still in Blaine's hand. It was mine. Boone's jaw tightened. For the first time that evening, someone looked at me as if the answer mattered. I wished that felt good. It didn't. It felt dangerous, because people in my family had spent so long accepting the easier version of me, the distant son, the quiet one, the man who never settled down, the brother who missed birthdays, holidays, funerals, and dinners. They noticed the empty chair I left behind. They never asked what kept me away. Blaine had built a whole reputation in those absences. He stayed. He shook hands. He helped Dad at the shop. He remembered what stories to tell at church suppers. I was overseas, then classified, then divorced, then silent. By the time I came back for good, the family had already decided who I was. Boone stepped near me after Blaine finally tossed the coin back into the box. He did not make a scene. He simply stood beside the blue chair and said, "What unit were you with?" I gave him the answer I had given people for years. Long time ago. He studied me. Military men know when a door is closed. They also know when it was locked from the inside. He nodded once, but he did not leave. Dad placed the pocket watch beside his plate without opening the note. He did not mean to hurt me. That was the hardest part. He was distracted. Guests were waiting. Blaine was already telling another story. Still, I looked at that unopened note and felt something shift. Maybe silence had protected them. Maybe it had protected me. Or maybe all it had done was let the wrong people write my life in permanent ink. As the last light faded over the ranch, Boone looked at me one more time and asked a question no one in my family had ever asked. Boone did not ask where I served. He did not ask what rank I held. He did not ask if I had medals tucked away in some drawer. He looked at the challenge coin, then at me, and asked quietly, "What did they call you?" That question landed differently. A civilian hears a nickname and thinks it is harmless, something funny, something earned in a bar or a locker room. But men who have served know better. A call sign can carry a mistake, a rescue, a bad night, a debt nobody ever paid back. Sometimes it follows a man longer than his own name does. I looked past Boone toward the tables where my family was laughing again. "Why do you want to know?" I asked. Boone did not smile. "That coin," he said, nodding toward the box Blaine had dropped back onto the gift table, "and the way you reached for it reminds me of men I knew who carried things they never showed anybody." It was a careful answer, respectful. That made it harder to brush off. I said, "It was a long time ago." That usually means it wasn't. Before I could answer, Blaine's voice rolled across the yard again. He had moved back near the center table, telling a story about how Dad once made him work through a summer thunderstorm because a DOS man doesn't quit when the sky gets loud. People ate it up. Blaine was good at that. He could turn ordinary family memories into proof that he was built different. He could make Dad laugh, make cousins nod, make strangers believe the DOS name meant discipline and success. Then he spotted Boone standing beside me. That bothered him. I saw it immediately. Blaine had always treated attention like property. If someone important looked too long at me, he felt robbed. He walked over with another drink in his hand. "Careful, Boone," he said, loud enough for the nearest table to hear. Colton's got about 100 stories that make him sound important. A few guests laughed. Boone did not. That small refusal changed Blaine's face. Not much, but enough. Come on, Blaine said. You know how he is. Always mysterious. Always quiet. Makes people think there's something deep going on. I looked at him. For most of my life, I had let those comments pass. I had told myself ignoring them was maturity. Maybe sometimes it was. But there is a difference between refusing to fight and helping someone sharpen the knife. Blaine, I said, let it go. The yard did not fall silent, but the people close enough to hear us stopped chewing. Blaine tilted his head. Or what? I kept my voice level. Just let it go. No threat, no raised hand, no performance. But something in the way I said it made Boone turn slightly toward me. He understood what Blaine did not. I was not afraid of my brother. I was holding back because this was still my father's birthday, and I had not yet decided what kind of son I wanted to be by the end of it. Blaine smirked. See? That right there. Always dramatic. He walked off before I could answer, which was another old habit of his. Throw the match, then leave someone else standing in the smoke. I looked toward Dad. He had seen enough to know something was wrong. He did nothing. That was the part I had spent too many years trying to explain away. Dad rarely joined in when Blaine mocked me. He did not need to. His silence gave Blaine plenty of room. One sentence from him could have changed the weather in our family. It never came. The sun had almost disappeared by then. The string lights glowed over the yard, making everything look warmer than it felt. Someone cut another sheet cake. Kids ran past with sticky hands. A cousin asked where the trash bags were. Life kept moving around the wound. My eyes went back to the pocket watch. Dad had placed it beside his chair, unopened note still tucked under the lid. It sat there like a patient thing, restored, working, waiting for someone to care enough to wind it. I hated how much I understood that. Boone followed my gaze, but said nothing. When I looked back at him, he was studying my hands. Old scars across the knuckles, a stiff ring finger that never fully healed. The habit I had of standing with my right side angled toward open space. He was putting pieces together. I could see it. Then he said very softly, almost to himself, there was a pilot we thought was dead. I did not move. Boone's eyes sharpened. Years back, he continued. Bad extraction, bad weather. Radio line stayed open after everyone said it was over. The noise from the party seemed to thin out, though nobody had actually quieted. I said, a lot of stories get passed around. Most do, Boone replied. This one didn't sound like a story. Across the yard, Blaine raised his glass again. Still performing, still grinning, still certain the night belonged to him. He had missed the warning. So had everyone else. Only Boone was watching the ground shift under us. Then Blaine raised his glass again and said the one thing that finally made staying silent impossible. Blaine did not say it right away. That was his style. He liked to dress cruelty up in a story first, give people time to smile, then slide the blade in when the room was already leaning his way. He lifted his glass toward Dad and said, Now, folks, everybody knows our father raised us to work hard. No handouts, no excuses, no feeling sorry for yourself. Several men around the table nodded like they were hearing gospel. Dad sat under the string lights with cake crumbs on his plate and bourbon in his hand. He looked tired, but proud of the party, proud of the crowd, proud of Blaine. Then Blaine looked at me. Dad always knew which son would succeed, he said. A few people laughed before he finished. Blaine smiled wider. And he always knew which one wouldn't. There it was. Another round of laughter rolled through the tables. I stayed still, not because it did not hurt. It did. But I had learned a long time ago that if you react too quickly, people stop hearing what was done to you and start judging the way you responded. So I watched Dad. That was the part that kept catching me. He could have stopped it with one sentence. Enough. That was all it would have taken. Instead, he gave a weak smile and stared at his glass. A father does not have to throw the stone to leave a bruise. Sometimes he only has to watch someone else throw it and call that peace. I looked over at the pocket watch. Dad had placed it beside the birthday cake, still unopened, still untouched except for those few seconds when he first saw it. The little note beneath the lid had not moved. Reliable things get ignored when people assume they will always wait. I knew something about that. For a minute, I almost convinced myself Blaine was right. Maybe my life had not amounted to much in the way my family measured things. I did not have a wife sitting beside me, no children running up for pictures, no company sign with my name on it, no grand speech about carrying the DOS legacy. What I had were injuries I did not explain, names I did not say out loud, and memories that showed up at 2 in the morning without asking permission. Then my phone vibrated. I would have ignored it, but it buzzed again almost immediately. Unknown number. The message was short. You should know what your brother has been saying about you. Attached was an audio file. I looked toward Blaine. He was laughing with 2 men from the dealership, acting like he had not just carved me up in front of half the county. I stood slowly and walked away from the tables, not far enough to make a scene, just past the smokers, near the side of the barn where the music softened and the voices blended together. I pressed play. Blaine's voice came through first. Colton? He's a washed-up nobody who got lucky wearing a uniform. Someone else laughed. Then Blaine again. Dad knows it. Everybody knows it. He just drifts in and out, looking all wounded, and people are supposed to act impressed. Another voice asked, Does he know what your dad really thinks of him? Blaine chuckled. He stopped mattering years ago. I stopped the recording. Not because I could not hear more, because I had heard enough. There is a difference between being misunderstood and being managed. Blaine had not stumbled into hurting me. He had built part of his life around keeping me small. I stood there beside the barn with the phone in my hand, and for the first time that night, I did not know what the right thing was. If I played the recording, I would ruin Dad's birthday. Everyone would say I brought drama. They would talk about timing, manners, respect. If I said nothing, Blaine would keep doing what he had always done. He would keep writing the family history with me as the cautionary tale. Both choices felt wrong. That was the trap nobody talks about. Sometimes standing up for yourself means becoming inconvenient to people who preferred you quiet. A few yards away, my nephew Owen sat alone near the cooler, pretending to scroll his phone. He was 16, thin-shouldered, always careful around the louder men. I had seen Blaine tease him earlier for not wanting to play football with the cousins. Don't be so sensitive, Blaine had told him. The boy's face had changed the same way mine used to. That did more to me than the recording, because I suddenly understood that my silence was not neutral. It was teaching Owen that this was how men in our family survived. Take the hit. Smile. Make everybody comfortable. Boone came up beside me without making a sound. He did not ask about the phone. He did not need to. Whatever you're carrying tonight, he said. Don't make the decision from anger. I looked toward the lights and the laughter. Boone waited a beat, then added, but don't make it from fear either. That stayed with me. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked back toward the party, not ready to expose anything. Not yet, but something inside me had shifted. For most of my life, I believed peace required endurance. Standing there under those string lights, I began to wonder if what I had called peace was only surrender wearing a better suit. An hour later, Blaine crossed a line he could never uncross, and something inside me finally stopped trying to keep the peace. The party tried to move on after that. People are good at pretending nothing happened, when pretending feels easier than choosing a side. Someone turned the music back up. Plates were cleared. A few guests moved toward the patio with coffee and cake. The men from Blaine's office gathered near the coolers, laughing too loudly, the way people do when a room has gotten uncomfortable. I kept my phone in my pocket and my hands empty. That was deliberate. If I touched the watch box again, I knew I might walk out with it. If I touched the recording, I might play it before I was steady enough to handle what came next. So I watched. Blaine, of course, could not leave well enough alone. He stood by the dessert table with a fresh drink, telling a story about how I once missed a family workday years ago. Colton always had a reason, he said. Weather, travel, some mystery job. You know how it is with him, always unavailable until somebody else does the heavy lifting. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because the year he meant I had been overseas, sleeping in boots, calling home from a line so bad Dad could barely hear me. But Blaine's version got easier mileage. Then he saw Owen sitting near me. Owen was 16, quiet, thin as a fence rail, with hair falling over his eyes. He had been picking at a piece of cake he did not seem to want. He reminded me of myself at that age, trying to take up less room so nobody would notice how badly the jokes landed. Blaine pointed at him. "Well, look at that," he said. "The family failure found an apprentice." Some people laughed. Owen's face dropped. That was it. Not the toast, not the chair, not even the recording. That boy, lowering his eyes, cracked something open in me, because I knew that look. I had worn it at dinner tables, ball games, Christmas mornings, every place where someone older and louder decided humiliation counted as humor. I stood. Not fast, not loud, just stood. The conversation thinned out around us. Blaine turned, still smiling. "What now?" I looked at Owen first. "You're fine. Don't carry that." Then I looked at my brother. "Leave him out of this." The yard changed. Not dramatically. No one gasped. But people noticed. Colton Doss did not interrupt. Colton Doss did not challenge Blaine. Colton Doss took the joke and made himself useful afterward. That was the role. And I had just stepped out of it. Blaine gave a short laugh. "Relax. It's a joke." A cousin near the table said, "Come on, Colton. Don't make this ugly." Mom's voice came from behind Dad's chair. "Let's all calm down." Another relative muttered, "It's your father's birthday." There it was, the old family math. Blaine could insult me in public, but if I objected, I was the one ruining the night. I looked around at them. "No," I said. "The joke isn't the problem." Nobody spoke. "The problem is everyone pretending it is." That sentence did not need volume. It walked through the yard on its own. Blaine's smile thinned. Boone stepped forward then, not beside me exactly, but close enough for people to notice. He looked at Blaine and asked, "Why are you trying so hard to prove he's a failure?" That question landed clean. Blaine blinked. For once, he did not have a ready laugh. Then he recovered. "Men like Blaine always do when there is still an audience." "Oh, please," he said. "He's been waiting all night for somebody to feel sorry for him." That's Colton's whole thing. Quiet, wounded, mysterious. Makes people think there's more there than there is. Boone did not respond. So Blaine pushed harder. "If he was really somebody important, we'd know about it." The words hung there. A few guests shifted in their seats. Boone's gaze moved to me. I felt the truth rise toward my mouth. The name, the story, the piece of me I had buried so deep even saying it felt like opening a grave. But I stopped myself. Not because Blaine deserved protection. Because Boone's words came back to me. Not from anger, not from fear. If I spoke then, it would have been anger. And anger would let Blaine turn the whole thing around. So I stayed still. Blaine mistook that for victory. He pointed his glass toward me and said, "Dad spent years cleaning up your messes." That was false. Not exaggerated. False. Dad looked at his plate. Again. No correction. No defense. Not even a tired shake of the head. The quiet from him spread through me in a way the insults never could. It told me the family story mattered more than what was true. I turned to Blaine. My voice came out steady. "You should stop talking about things you don't understand." He smirked. "There he is. Big tough warning." "No," I said. "Just a fair one." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then someone restarted the music, softer this time. Guests tried to return to their conversations, but the party had lost its easy rhythm. People watched Blaine differently now. A few watched me as if they were seeing the outline of someone they had ignored. Boone did not look away. He had heard enough to know there was a locked door in the middle of that family yard, and he was getting closer to the key. By the time Boone finally asked me for my call sign, half the family thought the night was over. They had no idea it was just beginning. The party had thinned, but it had not ended. That was the strange part. After all that tension, people still found reasons to linger. Older cousins stood under patio heaters with coffee. A few business associates checked their phones near the driveway. Kids had been taken inside to watch television. The music had dropped low enough that I could hear the wind moving through the live oaks. I stepped away from the tables and stood near the fence line. For a few minutes, nobody bothered me. That little stretch of quiet gave me room to think. Failure, disappointment, distant son, family burden. Those names had followed me so long, I had almost stopped noticing their weight. But standing there in the dark, I realized something I should have understood sooner. I never chose any of them. They were handed to me by people who needed me small so their version of the family could stay comfortable. Boone came over without hurrying. He stood beside me, facing the pasture instead of the crowd. That told me he knew how to have a hard conversation. Some men corner you, others leave space for the truth to step forward on its own. After a moment, he asked, "What was your call sign?" This time, it did not sound like curiosity. It sounded like confirmation. I let out a slow breath. "You already think you know." "I think I heard stories," he said. Stories that did not feel like stories. I looked back toward the patio. Dad sat near the cake table, the pocket watch still beside him. The note under the lid remained unopened. Blaine stood not far away, talking too loudly to a man from the bank, acting as if the night had returned to normal. "People think silence means pride," I said, "or secrecy." Boone waited. It wasn't either. I had buried that part of my life because names came with faces. Men who made it home, men who didn't, men whose wives sent Christmas cards for a few years, then stopped because grief has its own calendar. I had come back with all my limbs, and still felt like pieces of me had been left in places no map could properly name. My marriage did not survive it. Sleep became work. Crowds became calculations. Even family dinners felt like rooms I had to escape. So I let people misunderstand me. At least misunderstanding stayed outside the locked door. Owen approached while I was still looking at the ground. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain. "Uncle Colton?" I turned. "Yeah?" He shoved his hands into his hoodie pocket. "Thanks for saying something earlier." "For you?" He nodded. I almost told him it was nothing. That would have been easy. Instead, I said, "It was something." He looked relieved, and that small change in his face affected me more than I expected. Because if I had stayed quiet, he would have learned what I had learned too young. Take the insult. Keep the peace. Do not make the loud people uncomfortable. Maybe that was the real reason I was still there. Not to win, not to punish Blaine, to stop handing the next kid the same broken rulebook. Owen went back inside after that, and I watched him go. Something settled in me. I did not need Blaine to apologize. I did not need Dad to suddenly see every year he had missed. I did not need the whole yard to clap and rewrite my life in one evening. My value had existed before they recognized it. That was the part I had been slow to learn. Across the patio, Blaine noticed Boone and me still talking. Of course he did. Attention had shifted, and he could not leave it alone. He walked over with a smile that had already done enough damage for one night. "What? Colton telling war stories now?" he said. "Careful, Boone. He gets better every time he tells them." Boone ignored him completely. He kept his eyes on me. "Helmand?" he asked. I said nothing for a second, then answered, "Among other places." 2006? My hand tightened once at my side. "Late season. Radio relay went down?" "More than once." Boone's breathing changed. Not much, just enough that I caught it. Blaine looked between us, annoyed now. What is this? Some kind of veteran guessing game? Boone finally turned toward him. "No," he said. "It's memory." That took some air out of Blaine, but not enough. I saw him clearly then. Not as the powerful older brother I had spent my life avoiding. Not as the chosen son. Just a man who needed someone beneath him to feel tall. That was his weakness. He could not resist proving himself in front of an audience, and men like that eventually say more than they meant to. Boone faced me again. The patio had grown quieter. Not silent. Not yet. But enough people had noticed the change in his voice. Conversations thinned. Heads turned. Then Boone asked one last time, "What was your call sign?" I looked toward the dark pasture beyond the lights. Names moved through me. Voices, rotors, static. Promises made in places where promises were sometimes all a man had left. I had spent years trying to forget the name, but maybe forgetting was not peace. Maybe it was just another kind of surrender. So I turned back to Boone, opened my mouth, and finally answered. I finally spoke the name I had spent 20 years trying to forget, and the sound of a glass hitting the floor changed everything. The word left my mouth quietly. Ghostline. For half a second, nothing happened. Then Boone's glass slipped from his hand and hit the patio stone so hard it shattered under the string lights. The music stopped. A few people turned with irritated looks, then froze when they saw Boone's face. He was not embarrassed. He was not confused. He looked like a man who had just heard a voice from a grave he had visited too many times. He stepped toward me. "Say that again," he said. I did not. I had already given him enough. Boone straightened. His shoulders pulled back. His heels came together. And in front of my father, my brother, and every person who had laughed at me that night, Boone Garrison stood at attention. His voice broke slightly. Ghostline kept me breathing. The yard went silent. Not polite silent, not awkward silent. The kind of silent that makes people afraid to move their hands. Blaine gave a short laugh, but it had no strength in it. "What is this supposed to be?" Boone did not look at him. "In Helmand," he said, "we lost comms, lost air cover, and command marked us unrecoverable." My fingers curled once at my side. I had spent years keeping that night buried. Boone was opening the ground with every sentence. He continued. The only voice that stayed with us was Ghostline. Several guests looked at me. Boone's eyes stayed wet but steady. He said, "Stay low. Count my voice. If you can hear me, you're not dead yet." I heard that voice for hours. I said nothing. There was nothing useful I could add. Then an older woman near the patio steps rose from her chair. I had seen her earlier with Boone but had not placed her. She opened her purse and pulled out a photograph. "My son was Landon Vance," she said. The name landed in me before the picture did. She set it on the table near my hand. A young Marine grinned up from the faded print, all sunburn and confidence. "He came home long enough to meet his daughter," she said. "He told me if I ever met Ghostline, I should say thank you." I looked at the picture. He laughed over rotor noise. I said softly, "I remember that." Dolores Vance pressed a hand to her mouth. That was when Blaine realized the room had left him. So he did what desperate people do. He attacked the wound. "Funny," he said, walking toward the gift table. "Nobody mentions this part." He pulled papers from an old envelope. My envelope. The one I had mailed to Dad years ago. My stomach tightened, but I did not move. Blaine held up a document. PTSD evaluation. Temporary suspension. Psychological treatment. He looked around the yard like he had discovered the real truth. Maybe he wasn't some hero. Maybe he was just broken. Whispers moved through the guests. I felt the old shame try to rise. The divorce. The sleepless nights. The months when a car backfiring could take me out of the present. For one dangerous moment, I almost defended myself too quickly. Then I saw Owen watching from the back door. And I remembered. If I let Blaine turn pain into guilt, he would teach that boy the same lesson this family had taught me. So I did not argue. I only said, "Blaine, did you read the last page?" He stopped. That pause told the room everything. I walked over and took the file from his hand. He did not fight me. His fingers had gone loose. I turned to the final page and held it out. Boone stepped beside me and read aloud. "Return to active duty. Recommended for valor citation. Psychological injuries sustained during combat rescue operations." He looked at Blaine. "That page matters. Without that page, none of the others mean anything." Blaine's face changed color. Dad stood slowly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at my brother. I tried. The old envelope sat in Blaine's hand, like evidence. "I sent you that letter," I said to Dad. "The commendation copy, the photo, everything. Blaine told me you didn't need my excuses." Blaine lifted both hands. "I was protecting you, Dad. Your health was bad. He was going to dump all that war stuff on you and make himself look important." Dad stared at him. "You hid the letter." "It wasn't like that." Dad turned toward me, and something in his face finally broke loose. "And I made it easy for him," he said, "because I never asked." That sentence hurt worse than the jokes, because it was honest. Dad reached inside his jacket and pulled out a sealed paper. I knew what it was before he said anything. Everyone close to the family knew he had planned some announcement that night. He looked at Blaine. "I was going to name you trustee and executor tonight." Blaine went still. Dad folded the paper once, then again. "I won't be making that announcement." No one clapped. They did not need to. The punishment was in the silence. I looked down and saw the broken glass from Boone's drink. Out of habit, I bent to gather the larger pieces. Boone touched my arm. "Leave it," he said. "Some things should stay broken long enough for people to see them." So I left it there. Dad walked to the old blue folding chair by the coolers. The chair that had held me outside my own family all evening. He folded it, carried it away, then pulled out the empty chair beside him at the main table. "Sit here," he said. 3 words. Too late, but not meaningless. I picked up the pocket watch and placed it in his hand. He looked at me. "Son, I don't know how to fix this." I nodded once. "You don't fix 20 years at a birthday party." His eyes filled, but I did not rescue him from the truth. "I just wanted you to have it," I said. Then I walked toward my truck. Behind me, nobody laughed. By sunrise, my phone was full of apologies, but the one message I couldn't stop thinking about wasn't from Blaine. I got home before dawn and left my boots by the door. For a while, I just sat at the kitchen table without turning on the lights. The house was quiet in the way only a man's house can be quiet after he has spent too many years learning how not to need anyone. My phone kept lighting up. Cousins, neighbors, people from the party. A few veterans Boone must have called before the coffee was even brewed. Most of the messages were careful. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. That should never have happened." Then there was Blaine. 14 messages before breakfast. The first one sounded like damage control. "Call Dad. You need to tell him I didn't mean it like that. People are taking this the wrong way." I didn't answer. That was new for me. Usually, I would have tried to calm things down, smooth out the edges, make sure nobody felt too guilty for hurting me. But that morning, I let the phone sit on the table and make its little flashes of light without giving it my peace. The message I kept rereading was from Owen. "Thank you for standing up yesterday. I didn't know adults could do that without screaming." That one stayed with me, not because it praised me, because it meant the cycle had cracked. A kid had watched a grown man draw a line without turning cruel. That mattered more than any apology waiting in my inbox. Boone called around 9. "You all right?" he asked. "Not sure yet." That's an honest answer. He invited me to a small veterans gathering the next month. Nothing formal. Coffee, folding chairs, men and women who had come home carrying more than duffel bags. I almost said no, out of habit. Boone heard the hesitation. "You spent a long time hiding from your story," he said. "Maybe somebody else needs to hear it." I did not promise him anything, but I wrote down the date. The weeks after Dad's birthday did what time usually does. They revealed what people meant. Some relatives disappeared. Some called once, then went quiet because an apology is easier than a changed relationship. Blaine lost more than a title that night. He lost automatic belief. People started questioning old stories. Who paid for what? Who missed which event? And why? Who had been blamed because it was convenient? For a man who built his power by narrating everyone else, that loss hurt. Near Thanksgiving, Dad came to see me. Alone. No audience, no speech, no pressure. He stood on my porch, holding the wooden box. I let him in and made coffee, because that was how our family handled things too large to say standing up. He set the box on my kitchen table. Inside was the pocket watch. "It should belong to you," he said. I looked at it for a long moment. Once, I would have taken it like proof. Proof that he saw me. Proof that I had not wasted my loyalty. Proof that I had finally earned the place I had wanted. Instead, I closed the lid gently. I spent a lot of years thinking that watch would prove something. Dad lowered his eyes. "It doesn't," I said. He nodded. And, to his credit, he did not argue. That was the start of something. Not repair, not yet, but honesty has to start somewhere. By winter, I went to Boone's gathering. I did not tell the whole story. I did not perform pain for strangers. I talked about coming home wrong, about silence, about how isolation can start feeling like wisdom if you let it go on long enough. A younger veteran stayed afterward. He said, "Does it ever stop feeling like nobody's coming?" I thought about Helmand, about static, about Boone's glass breaking on the patio. Then I said, "If you can hear a voice calling you back, you're not gone yet." He nodded like he needed that more than he wanted to admit. Near the end of the year, Blaine showed up at my place. He looked older than he had at the party. No grin, no performance. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was not perfect. Real apologies rarely are." I listened. Then I said, "I believe you're sorry." His shoulders eased. "That doesn't mean things go back to how they were." The relief left his face, but he accepted it. That told me more than the apology had. At the next family dinner, there was a seat waiting beside Dad. No announcement, no fuss, just a chair. I sat for a while, ate supper, laughed once when Owen told a story about school. Then I left before dessert. Not because I was unwanted, because I was free to go. That was the difference. Driving home under a wide Texas sunset, I finally understood the name I had tried so hard to bury. Ghostline had never meant danger. It meant a voice in the dark, a way back. For years, I had helped other people find their way home. It took one ugly birthday party, a broken glass, and a boy who needed a better example for me to start finding mine. For most of my life, I thought I was fighting to earn a seat at someone else's table. In the end, the greatest peace came when I realized I already had a place of my own.